Alright, let's talk about something that almost nobody in Hollywood does well anymore. Let's talk about the art of the reset. You know what I mean, that moment in a franchise where everything you thought you knew gets shuffled around, the comfortable pieces you've grown attached to get moved off the board, and suddenly the story is asking you to fall in love all over again with something new. It's a gamble. A huge one. Because audiences are creatures of habit. We love what we know. We love what made us laugh the first time, what made us feel warm the second time, what made our kids absolutely lose their minds the third time. And yet here comes Despicable Me 4, strutting into theaters in the summer of 2024 with the audacity, and I mean genuine, uncut audacity, to say, hey, you love Gru? You love the Minions? Cool. Now watch us throw a baby into the mix and see how everybody handles it. Now before you roll your eyes and say, oh great, the baby angle, how original, stay with me. Because what this film actually does with the premise is a lot more nuanced, a lot more emotionally layered, and frankly a lot more cinematic than most people gave it credit for when it dropped. Critics were mixed. Box office was solid. But the conversation around this movie, I think people missed some genuinely rich stuff that's worth unpacking in serious detail. So that's what we're doing today. We are going deep on Despicable Me 4. We're covering every scene, every character beat, every thematic layer, every creative choice, from the opening frames to the final credits. By the time we're done, you're going to have a completely new appreciation for what this movie is doing, why it matters in the context of the whole franchise, and whether it earns its place in one of animation's most beloved series. Grab something to drink. Get comfortable. This is going to be a long one, and trust me, it's worth every minute. Let's go. Section 2, Movie Overview, Context, Cast, and Expectations.
Despicable Me 4 is finally
Despicable
here,
Me 4
and it's his
was
new challenges
released on
with his
July
family,
3,
while the Minions bring their
2024,
classic
in the
chaos.
United States. It was directed by Chris Renaud, who also helmed the original Despicable Me back in 2010 as well as The Secret Life of Pets films. Joining him in the director's chair was Patrick Delage, a veteran of the Illumination animation team who brings a really crisp, kinetic energy to the visual storytelling. The screenplay was written by Mike White, yes, that Mike White, the Emmy-winning creator of The White Lotus, and Ken Daurio, who has been a fixture in the Despicable Me universe since the very beginning. Now, let that sink in for a second. Mike White, the guy who wrote School of Rock, who created one of HBO's most critically lauded prestige dramas, co-writing an animated Minions sequel. That's either a fascinating creative collision or a complete non sequitur depending on how you look at it. But we'll come back to that. The cast is stacked, as you'd expect from a property of this scale. Steve Carell returns as Gru, and at this point his performance in this role is so deeply lived in, so effortlessly committed, that it barely registers as voice acting anymore, it just is Gru. Kristen Wiig comes back as Lucy, now fully embedded in her role as wife and stepmother. Miranda Cosgrove, Dana Gaier, and Madison Polan return as the adopted daughters Margo, Edith, and Agnes. Joey King joins the cast as Poppy Prescott, a brand new character who becomes central to the film's emotional through line. Will Ferrell absolutely devours the scenery as the villain Maxime Le Mal, a former classmate of Gru's with a personal vendetta and a seriously unhinged obsession with cockroaches. And Sofía Vergara plays Valentina, Maxime's equally unhinged partner in crime. The film is distributed by Universal Pictures and produced by Illumination Entertainment, the studio behind this entire franchise, as well as the Super Mario Bros. Movie, Sing, and The Secret Life of Pets. At this point, Illumination has basically become synonymous with a very specific brand of animated entertainment: bright, fast, funny, relentlessly merchandisable, and occasionally surprisingly heartfelt. Their films make extraordinary amounts of money. The original Despicable Me launched what would become one of the highest-grossing animated franchises of all time, with the combined box office of all films in the universe, including the Minions spin-offs, reaching somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion worldwide. So the expectations walking into Despicable Me 4? They were genuinely complicated. On one hand, audiences love this franchise. The characters are iconic. The Minions are, whether you like it or not, one of the most recognizable animated creations in modern pop culture. Gru's arc from supervillain to devoted father remains one of the more surprisingly effective character transformations in mainstream animation. On the other hand, franchise fatigue is real. By 2024, we'd already had Despicable Me, Despicable Me 2, Minions, Despicable Me 3, Minions, The Rise of Gru, and various short films and specials. That's a lot of Gru. A lot of Minions. A lot of this world. The question on everyone's lips was, does this franchise still have something new to say? Or is it just coasting on goodwill and Kevin, Stuart, and Bob doing silly things in overalls? The answer, as I'll argue throughout this review, is more interesting than you might expect. This movie is not perfect. But it's doing something genuinely ambitious for a franchise of this vintage. It's asking its protagonist to grow again, in a direction that feels both inevitable and surprisingly fresh. Let's get into it. Section 3, the full story breakdown, scene by scene. Opening act, the world has changed, and so has Gru. The film opens, and I want you to picture this if you haven't seen it, with a sequence that immediately signals the tonal register we're operating in. We're in the comfortable, slightly absurdist suburban world we know from the earlier films. The neighborhood with the cul-de-sac. The house that's simultaneously cozy and secretly equipped with the infrastructure of a supervillain lair. The minions. All of it. But something is different. There's a baby. Gru Jr., hereafter referred to by the film and by us simply as Gru Jr., is a tiny, round, perpetually startled-looking infant who has recently entered the family. And from the very first moment we see him, the film is telegraphing its central dramatic tension with complete clarity. This baby hates Gru. Not in a dramatic, plot-driven way. Not for reasons of conspiracy or circumstance. Just, instinctively, inexplicably, in the way that sometimes babies just decide they don't like someone's face. Gru Jr. wants absolutely nothing to do with his father. Every time Gru tries to hold him, the baby screams. Every time Gru tries to comfort him, the baby recoils. Every time Gru tries to do something sweet or paternal, Gru Jr. treats it like a personal offense against nature. This is, in case it needs to be said, absolutely hilarious. The animation team does extraordinary work with this baby's face. He has this permanently indignant expression, like a tiny old man who just found out his favorite restaurant closed. And Steve Carell plays Gru's bewilderment and wounded pride with exactly the right amount of comedic vulnerability. But here's why the film is smart to open this way. It's not just comedy. It's establishing the emotional question that the entire movie is going to revolve around. Gru became a father, genuinely, transformatively, in a way that completely reshaped who he is as a person, when he adopted Margo, Edith, and Agnes. That story, told over 3 films, was fundamentally about a man who had closed himself off from love, learning to open himself up. Learning that vulnerability isn't weakness. Learning that the greatest thing you can build isn't a weapon or a scheme, it's a family. So now here comes Gru Jr. And the question the film is asking is, does all that growth stick? When the emotional challenge is completely different, when it's not a child who needs to be won over through grand gestures and heroism, but an infant who requires patience and quiet and mundane consistency, does Gru still have the tools? Or does he have to learn all over again? That's a rich question. And the film knows it. We move quickly from these opening domestic scenes into the setup of the main plot. The Anti-Villain League, the law enforcement organization that Gru now works for, receives intelligence about a threat. The threat is Maxime Le Mal. Enter the villain, Maxime Le Mal and the cockroach obsession. Will Ferrell as Maxime Le Mal is, without question, the most unhinged and delightful villain performance in the franchise since Vector in the original film. And I say that with complete sincerity. Maxime is introduced with a flashback that tells us everything we need to know about him. He and Gru were classmates. In a rival villain school, or perhaps the same institution, depending on how you interpret the intentionally vague continuity. Young Maxime was always second to Gru. Always the runner-up. Always the one who almost made it but didn't quite get the recognition he craved. And that wound, accumulated over years of perceived slights and professional jealousy, has curdled into something genuinely dangerous. But here's the twist that makes Maxime special: his thing is cockroaches. Not in a metaphorical way. Not as a symbol. The man is obsessed with cockroaches. He's studied them. He's incorporated them into his villain aesthetic. He has plans, deeply, disturbingly specific plans, to use cockroach-based technology to achieve his goals. And Will Ferrell plays this with such absolute conviction, such complete commitment to the bit, that it crosses from ridiculous into genuinely funny and then into something almost menacing. Sofía Vergara as Valentina gets considerably less to do than Ferrell, which is a genuine waste of a performer of her comedic gifts. But she has some moments, particularly in her interactions with Maxime's cockroach henchmen, that land beautifully. There's a running dynamic between them that suggests their relationship is simultaneously a genuine love story and a mutual admiration society between two people who have agreed that being insane together is better than being sane apart. It's oddly sweet, in the most deranged way possible. Maxime's connection to Gru means that this isn't just a random villain of the week situation. This is personal. Maxime doesn't just want to do crime, he wants to humiliate Gru specifically. He wants to prove, finally and definitively, that Gru was never the better villain. That the life Gru has built, the family and the respectability and the reformed hero status, is fragile and can be taken apart. And that's where the film's central dramatic machinery kicks into gear. The plot mechanism, witness protection and the Prescott family. After Maxime escapes from a high-security AVL facility, in a sequence that is visually spectacular and gives the film its first real action set piece, the threat level around Gru and his family escalates dramatically. Maxime, it's established, has specifically targeted Gru for destruction. He's not just a general threat. He has a list, and Gru's name is at the top. The AVL's solution? Witness protection. The whole family has to relocate, assume new identities, and essentially disappear until Maxime can be neutralized. This is where the film makes its most interesting structural choice, and where I think a lot of people, critics and casual viewers alike, underestimated what was happening narratively. Because the film doesn't just use witness protection as an action movie plot device. It uses it as a character device. Specifically, it uses it as a way to strip Gru of everything external: his reputation, his house, his familiar surroundings, his professional identity, and force him to confront who he actually is when none of that scaffolding is available. The family is relocated to a generic, relentlessly cheerful suburb that feels like it was designed by someone who had only read about suburbs in a brochure. It's called Mayflower, and it's the kind of place where everyone is aggressively friendly, the lawns are perfectly maintained, and there's something faintly threatening about the uniformity of it all. Think The Truman Show meets HOA Nightmare. Gru, now going by the alias Gruden, the film has gentle fun with how bad this alias is, must fit in. Must be normal. Must suppress every instinct he has toward the dramatic and the villainous and the operatic, and just exist as a regular dad in a regular neighborhood. For a character like Gru, this is essentially psychological torture. But here's where the Prescott family enters the picture. Poppy Prescott, the heart of the film's second act. The Prescotts are the family next door. And from the moment we meet them, the film is playing with a specific dynamic that gives the second act most of its energy. The Prescott parents, played with wonderful self-satisfied obliviousness by a supporting cast that commits fully to the bit, are exactly the kind of aggressively normal, proudly mediocre suburban family that represents everything Gru has never been and could never comfortably become. They have barbecues. They care deeply about their lawn. They talk about their homeowners association with the passionate investment that other people reserve for causes that actually matter. But their daughter, Poppy, voiced by Joey King with a sharp, energetic, genuinely charismatic performance, is different. Poppy Prescott wants to be a villain. Not in a dark or genuinely threatening way. In the way that a precocious, ambitious, thoroughly modern teenager wants to be something that represents freedom and power and breaking the rules, but who has also clearly watched too many heist movies and romanticized the whole enterprise considerably. She has plans. She has notebooks full of schemes. She is completely serious about this in a way that's both ridiculous and oddly touching. And when she discovers, through a combination of her own investigative instincts and Gru's persistent inability to be inconspicuous, that her new neighbor is the Gru, former supervillain and current undercover legend, she is absolutely electrified. What follows is one of the film's richest and most entertaining dynamics. Poppy essentially coercing Gru into being her mentor. She wants him to help her with the scheme. She wants to learn from the master. And Gru, already overwhelmed by his new domestic situation, his unresolved tension with Gru Jr., and the general indignity of having to pretend to care about lawn maintenance, finds himself reluctantly pulled into this mentorship role he absolutely did not sign up for. Joey King's performance here deserves real credit. Poppy could easily be grating, she's aggressive, she's demanding, she doesn't take no for an answer, and she has the absolute confidence of someone who has never seriously failed at anything. But King gives her this undercurrent of genuine longing that makes her sympathetic. Poppy doesn't just want to do villain stuff because it's cool. She wants to matter. She wants to be exceptional. And in a family where both parents are relentlessly, lovingly, completely ordinary, that hunger for exceptionalism is both understandable and a little heartbreaking. There's also something the film is doing thematically here that I think is genuinely clever, and we'll get into it more in the themes section. But the short version is this: Poppy is a mirror for who Gru used to be. Young, ambitious, desperate to prove himself, drawn to the dramatic and the outsized. And Gru's journey with Poppy is, in some ways, a chance to parent his own past, to guide someone through the impulses he recognizes from himself towards something better. Meanwhile, the Margo, Edith, and Agnes subplot. Now, one of the criticisms leveled at this film, and it's a fair one, is that Margo, Edith, and Agnes get relatively little to do compared to their central roles in the earlier films. They have a subplot in the new neighborhood that involves navigating school, making friends, and the general upheaval of having your entire life uprooted by your dad's career in villain law enforcement. Agnes, in particular, continues to be the franchise's secret weapon. Her arc in this film involves a new friendship that may or may not be genuine, and there's a lovely thread running through her storyline about what it means to be authentic when you're in a situation that requires you to be something other than yourself. It's subtle, and it could have been developed more, but what's there is effective. Edith is the film's comic wild card in the domestic scenes. Her complete indifference to the chaos around her and her willingness to be casually menacing at a moment's notice continues to be one of the franchise's most underrated running gags. Margo navigates a more emotionally grounded arc around identity and belonging that connects nicely to the film's broader thematic concerns. The idea that you can be placed in a situation that doesn't fit who you are, and that the challenge is figuring out how to remain yourself anyway. It's a quiet thread, but it's there. The Minions, a new evolution. Okay. We have to talk about the Minions. Because Despicable Me 4 does something with the Minions that, frankly, is either the most inspired or most ridiculous creative choice in the franchise's history, and I've spent a genuinely unreasonable amount of time thinking about which it is. A select group of Minions, specifically, Kevin, Stuart, Bob, and a few others, are given experimental treatment by the AVL that transforms them. Not just minor alterations. Full-scale superhero transformations. These mega minions, and I'm aware of how that sounds, but stay with me, gain superpowers. Different powers for different minions, in keeping with their established personalities. Kevin gets strength-based powers. Stuart gets something energy-related. Bob, in what is probably the film's single funniest visual gag, becomes enormous in a way that is deeply inconvenient for everyone around him. The film uses this transformation to essentially create a third narrative strand, a superhero parody strand running parallel to the witness protection main plot and the Gru Poppy mentor dynamic. The Mega Minions go on missions. They do superhero things. They handle it exactly as well as you'd expect yellow, goggled, grammatically challenged creatures to handle having superpowers, which is to say, chaotically, destructively, and with complete sincerity. Now here's where opinions divide. Some viewers loved this. It's visually inventive, it gives the Minions something genuinely new to do, it generates some of the film's biggest laughs, and the superhero parody genre is ripe enough for this kind of treatment that there's real comedic potential. Other viewers felt it was the film spreading itself too thin, another subplot in a movie that already had quite a lot going on, and one that felt somewhat disconnected from the emotional core of the story. I actually land somewhere in the middle, but closer to the appreciative side. Here's why. The Minion transformation is thematically coherent with what the film is doing elsewhere. The film is about identity under pressure. About what happens to who you are when your circumstances change radically. The Minions being transformed into something fundamentally different from what they've always been is, on a certain level, the film's most literal visualization of its own theme. They gain power. They gain capability. But they're still essentially themselves, still driven by the same impulses, still communicating in the same fractured way, still fundamentally the same creatures they always were underneath the transformation. That's something. Whether it's enough is a fair question. Act 2 Escalation, Maxime closes in. While all of the above is developing at the domestic and comedic level, the film never lets you forget that there's a genuine threat in motion. Maxime Le Mal isn't just sulking somewhere, he's actively working, actively planning, actively drawing closer. The film deploys several well-constructed set pieces in the second act that escalate the tension. There's a sequence involving Maxime's cockroach-based surveillance technology that is both genuinely creepy in concept and visually inventive in execution. The idea of sending cockroaches as scouts, of having them infiltrate spaces too small for human agents, is treated with enough seriousness that it creates real suspense even in what is ostensibly a children's movie. There's also a mid-film action sequence set in a public space,
and it's his new
a shopping
challenges
mall,
with his family,
I believe,
while the Minions bring their
though the
classic
film
chaos.
somewhat deliberately makes the setting feel anonymous, where Gru has to operate undercover while managing both the threat of exposure and the persistent presence of Poppy, who has very much not been fully briefed on the actual danger involved in this situation. This sequence is one of the film's best pure craft achievements. The editing is sharp. The action choreography, and yes, animated films absolutely have action choreography, and the team here is excellent at it, is clear and inventive and builds momentum in exactly the right way. And Steve Carell's vocal performance in the action beats, juggling Gru's competence as an operative with his ongoing bewilderment at the situation he's found himself in, is a genuine pleasure. But the moment that really lands in the second act isn't an action beat. It's quieter than that. The turning point, Gru and Gru Jr. Somewhere in the middle of the film, right at the moment when the external pressure from Maxime is at its most intense, when the witness protection situation is at its most fraught, when the Poppy mentorship has reached a complication, there's a scene between Gru and Gru Jr. that I think is the emotional pivot point of the entire movie. It's late at night. Everyone else is asleep. The new house is strange and unfamiliar. And Gru, exhausted and overwhelmed, goes to check on the baby. And for a moment, just a moment, before Gru Jr. wakes up and the usual screaming and recoiling dynamic reasserts itself, Gru watches his son sleep. And the expression on his face is one that Steve Carell renders entirely without words, entirely through vocal tone and whatever breathing and presence he brings to the microphone. And the animators bring it to life with extraordinary care. It's a look of absolute, helpless love combined with absolute, helpless fear. Not fear of Maxime. Not fear of the mission. Fear of inadequacy. Fear that he doesn't know how to be this. Fear that no matter how much he loves this child, he might not be able to give him what he needs. I want to spend some time here because I think this moment, and the film's handling of the Gru Jr. relationship generally, is the most genuinely emotionally sophisticated thing the franchise has done since Gru read the Three Little Kittens book to the girls in the original film. Because what it's depicting is something real. Something that a lot of parents, particularly fathers, experience and rarely see depicted with honesty in mainstream entertainment. The love is there. The love has never been the question. But love alone isn't the same as capability. And the humbling recognition that you can feel the most powerful emotion in your life for someone and still not automatically know how to express it in the way they need, that's genuinely profound territory for an animated family film to be exploring. The film doesn't overplay the scene. It doesn't turn it into a speech. It just lets it exist for a moment, and then moves on. Which, counterintuitively, is exactly what makes it hit so hard. Act 3, everything converges. The third act of Despicable Me 4 is where the film's multiple strands come together, and I'll be upfront, this is also where the film is at its most conventionally plotted and least surprising. Maxime's plan reaches its execution phase. The cockroach technology is deployed. Gru's cover is threatened. The mega minions are needed in ways that the film has been building toward. Poppy's involvement in everything reaches a crisis point where her own growth and Gru's investment in her mentorship are tested by real consequences. And the Gru Jr. relationship reaches its resolution. Let's take these in order. The Maxime confrontation is everything you'd want from a final boss sequence in an animated film of this caliber. Will Ferrell unleashes fully here. The performance goes to places that are simultaneously hilarious and genuinely unhinged, and the cockroach technology gets to do things in the climax that are visually spectacular. The character design of Maxime in his fully powered-up villain state is excellent. There's a transformation element that I don't want to oversell but will say is committed to with such full visual conviction that it earns the drama it's reaching for. The Mega Minions' role in the climax is where their superhero transformation pays off most fully as a plot device. Each of their individual powers gets a moment that both serves the action and functions as a comedic beat. Bob's sequence in particular is the film's last great laugh, the specifics of which I'll let you discover or remember for yourself. But the visual gag involved is the kind of thing that gets funnier the longer it goes on. Poppy's arc in the third act is handled with more care than I expected. The film could have taken the easy route, have her realize that real villain life isn't as glamorous as she imagined, have her choose safety and normalcy, have the whole thing wrap up in a bow. Instead, the resolution of her arc is more interesting than the she doesn't abandon her ambitions. She doesn't become a different person. What she does is refine her understanding of what those ambitions are actually for. And she does it in a way that connects specifically to what Gru has been teaching her, not through lectures or moral speeches, but through example. This is good writing. This is Mike White's fingerprints, I think. The understanding that character change that feels earned isn't the character becoming something unrecognizable, but the character discovering what they were always moving toward. The resolution, what changes and what stays the same. And then there's Gru Jr. I won't tell you exactly how the resolution of the father-son dynamic arrives, partly because the specific circumstances are genuinely fun to experience, and partly because the how matters less than the what. But I will tell you that the film finds a way to bring this relationship to a point of genuine connection that doesn't feel forced or unearned. What's important, and what I think gets overlooked in discussions of this film, is that the resolution isn't and then the baby loved Gru back and everything was perfect. The resolution is subtler than that. The resolution is, Gru stops trying to win the baby over and just starts being present. Just starts showing up in the unglamorous, unsexy, not particularly heroic way that early parenthood actually requires, and in doing that, in relinquishing the need to be impressive, to be Gru in all the villainous, operatic, dramatic sense, something shifts. The baby doesn't suddenly adore him. But the baby lets him. And that's enough. For now, it's enough. I find this genuinely moving. The film is saying something about how the emotional rewards of parenthood, particularly early parenthood, are often not the grand gestures we imagine. They're the middle-of-the-night moments nobody else sees. They're the patience accumulated over repetitions. They're the surrender of ego in favor of presence. For a film featuring a man who once stole the moon, that's a surprisingly grounded and wise message. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Steve Carell as Gru. Let's just take a moment to appreciate what Steve Carell has done with this character over nearly 15 years of vocal performances. Gru, as a character concept, is not inherently deep. He's a comedic villain archetype, vaguely Eastern European, dramatically overdressed for every occasion, prone to speeches and moustache twirling and theatrical overreaction. In the hands of a less committed performer, he would be exactly what he appears to be on paper, a joke. A pleasant one, maybe. But a joke. Carell has turned him into something else entirely. Into someone with interiority. Into someone whose comedic exaggerations feel like specific manifestations of specific psychological realities. A man who learned early that being impressive was safer than being vulnerable, that power and scheme and capability were more reliable than love, and who has spent several films slowly, painfully, joyfully learning the opposite. In Despicable Me 4, Carell is doing something technically interesting with the performance that I don't think gets enough credit. He's playing Gru as simultaneously more secure than he's ever been and more uncertain than he's been in a while. The security comes from his family, from his marriage, from the established foundation of the life he's built. The uncertainty is about whether that foundation is enough to hold the new weight being placed on it. It's a layered performance for a voice role. It shouldn't work as well as it does. Kristen Wiig as Lucy. Lucy doesn't get as much to do in this film as in Despicable Me 2, and that's a genuine loss because Wiig's chemistry with Carell is one of the franchise's most reliable pleasures. What she does with the material she has is characteristically excellent. Lucy in this film is the stable one, the anchor, the person who genuinely has figured out how to be both herself and a parent and has done so with less drama than Gru. She's not perfect. There are moments where the weight of the relocation and the danger hits her, but she's the film's center of emotional gravity, and Wiig plays that with warmth and intelligence. Joey King as Poppy. The revelation of the film. King brings a specificity and energy to Poppy that elevates the character well beyond what the premise suggests. Poppy's voice has an urgency to it, a sense that this character is always 3 steps ahead of herself, always planning, always scheming, always running just slightly faster than the pace at which her own thoughts can catch up with her. It's a genuinely comic performance in the classical sense, precise, committed, character-specific. The moments where Poppy has to be vulnerable, where the ambition and the schemes give way to something more exposed, are handled beautifully. King understands that Poppy's bravado is armor, and she knows when to let the armor slip just enough. Will Ferrell as Maxime Le Mal. Will Ferrell doing an unhinged villain is, in some ways, the most predictable casting imaginable. Ferrell has been playing unhinged confidence in comedic contexts for his entire career. But he brings something specific to Maxime that elevates him above a generic Ferrell performance, a genuine sense of wounded pride. The cockroach obsession is funny, yes. But underneath it, Ferrell is playing a man who has spent his entire life being second. And there's a real human pathos to that, even when it's expressed through an obsession with insects and an aesthetic that can best be described as villain The Rock. The Minions. Kevin, Stuart, and Bob are as reliable as they've ever been, and their transformation into mega minions gives the animators playground for visual comedy that they exploit with real inventiveness. The Minions as characters haven't changed, and at this point they don't need to. They're essentially the franchise's ID, the pure expression of slapstick comic energy, and they function perfectly in that role. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism, and Subtext. The theme of identity under pressure. The film's witness protection premise is doing more work than it might initially appear. Strip away the plot mechanics, the new name, the new house, the new neighborhood, and what you have is a character being asked to exist without any of his external markers of identity. No lair. No professional reputation. No visible history of achievement. Just a man, a family, and the question of who he actually is when none of the packaging is available. This is a genuinely sophisticated theme, and it connects to something universal. Most of us build identities that are partly internal and partly constructed from external elements, our jobs, our communities, our histories, the way other people see us. The witness protection scenario literalizes the nightmare of having all that stripped away and being forced to confront what's left. Gru's answer, over the course of the film, is that what's left is enough. Is, in fact, more than what the external packaging contained. But the film earns this answer. It doesn't arrive easily or all at once. It arrives through the uncomfortable process of living without the armor. The mirror dynamic, Gru and Poppy. I mentioned this earlier, but it deserves deeper exploration. Poppy Prescott is not just a plot device or a comic foil. She's a thematic instrument, a way for the film to hold up a mirror to Gru and ask, what do you see? She wants what young Gru wanted, to be exceptional. To be singular. To do things no one else can do and be recognized for it. Her methods, the schemes, the plans, the dramatic ambition are the same methods
and it's
Gru
his new
used
challenges
to
with his
use.
family, while
But
the minions
Gru,
bring their
as
classic
Poppy's
chaos.
accidental mentor, can see now what he couldn't see when he was the one burning with that ambition, that the hunger she has isn't really for villainy. It's for purpose. For significance. For a sense that her existence has impact beyond the ordinary. And the guidance Gru gives her, imperfect, often reluctant, filtered through his own ongoing process of self-understanding, is fundamentally about redirecting that hunger rather than extinguishing it. Don't become a villain. Become something that uses that energy for something real. This is, when you strip it down, the franchise's core message expressed in its fourth iteration. And the fact that it's being expressed through a mentor-student relationship rather than directly through Gru himself gives it freshness. Parenthood and the surrender of ego. The Gru Jr. thread, as I discussed in the story breakdown, is fundamentally a meditation on the ego death that parenting requires. Not in a negative sense, not death as loss, but death as transformation. The self that has to die is the self that needs to be impressive, that needs to be seen, that needs to be performing some role. The new self that emerges, the parent self, operates on a different economy. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need recognition. It needs to show up. For Gru, a man whose entire sense of self for most of his life was constructed around being impressive, being feared, being exceptional, this is the final frontier. He's already learned to love. He's already learned to be vulnerable. Now he has to learn to be present in the most mundane, unglamorous, wholly private way. That's a real thing. That's a thing a lot of people go through. And the fact that it's being explored through the context of an animated film about a cartoon supervillain with yellow henchmen is part of what makes it interesting rather than limiting. The cockroach motif and resilience. This might be reading too much into a children's animated film, but I'm going to say it anyway. The cockroach theme surrounding Maxime is doing something thematically coherent with the rest of the movie. Cockroaches are, culturally, the symbol of resilience. They survive everything. They adapt. They're unkillable. They thrive in conditions that would destroy other creatures. Maxime's fascination with cockroaches is framed as obsession and eccentricity. But there's a subtext. He wants to be unkillable. He wants to be the thing that survives no matter what. He wants to be so resilient that Gru's success can't hurt him anymore. Of course, the irony, and the film is aware of this, is that his obsession with resilience is itself a wound. It's a symptom of how much Gru's shadow has damaged him. The most resilient character in the film isn't the one obsessing over cockroaches, it's Gru, who has been through enormous transformation and loss and vulnerability and has not become harder or more defended, but softer and more open. That's resilience. Not unkillability, but the capacity to keep growing. Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Animation and Visual Design. Illumination's visual house style is one of the most recognizable in animation: clean, vibrant, expressive in exaggerated ways, not quite photorealistic and not quite cartoonish, occupying this deliberately artificial but immersive middle space. In Despicable Me 4, they're working at the absolute top of their technical capability. The lighting work in this film is exceptional. There are scenes, particularly the night scenes, and the climactic sequences, where the way light interacts with characters and environments has a cinematic quality that rivals the best CG animation being produced anywhere in the world right now. The contrast between the antiseptic brightness of the witness protection suburb and the theatrical darkness of Maxime's villain spaces is used with real purpose. It's not just visual variety, it's character territory. The character animation, the actual performance in the movement and expression of the characters, reaches heights in this film that some of the franchise's other entries didn't. Particularly the facial animation on Gru and Gru Jr. The baby's expressions are animated with a specificity that goes beyond what's strictly necessary for comedy and into something that feels genuinely emotionally real. The Mega Minion design. The superhero transformations of the Minions are visually inventive in ways that feel like the design team had a lot of fun with them. Each transformation reflects the specific personality of the Minion who undergoes it, and the superhero parody elements are deployed with enough awareness of the genre being parodied that the jokes have targets and not just execution. Bob's transformation is the visual standout. The sheer scale and incongruity of what happens to him is handled with perfect comedic timing, and the film is smart enough to use the visual gag not just once but to escalate it. Score and sound design. The score for Despicable Me 4 is composed by Heitor Pereira, who has scored every film in the franchise and by now has developed a genuine musical vocabulary for this world. The themes are familiar and satisfying, the action cues are propulsive without being generic, and there are some genuinely lovely quieter moments in the score that support the emotional beats without overwhelming them. The sound design in the action sequences is crisp and inventive. The cockroach technology, in particular, is given a distinctive sound palette that makes it feel specific and alien in a way that works. The needle drops throughout the film. Illumination loves a well-placed popular song, and this entry continues that tradition, are generally well chosen, particularly a moment in the third act that I'll leave undescribed but that pairs a song choice with a visual gag in a way that is precisely timed for maximum effect. Direction and editing. Renaud and Delage keep the film moving at a pace that rarely gives you time to notice when the connective tissue is thin. This is a skill. Animated films can easily feel either rushed or slow, and Despicable Me 4 manages to feel brisk without feeling breathless. The editing, particularly in the action sequences, is clean and legible, a genuine accomplishment when your choreographing scenes involving multiple characters with different abilities moving through complex environments. The film's one directorial weakness is that it doesn't always commit fully to its emotional moments. There are beats, the late-night Gru Jr scene I described, some of Poppy's more vulnerable moments, that could have been held a beat or two longer and would have hit considerably harder. The instinct to keep things moving is generally good in a film like this, but there are moments where a little more stillness would have served the story. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. Where the film succeeds. I want to be clear about this. Despicable Me 4 is a better film than most people think it is. The critical consensus on it has been somewhat dismissive. It sits in a perfectly fine but unnecessary zone of critical reception, and I think that undersells what the film is doing. The emotional intelligence on display in the Gru Jr storyline is genuinely impressive for a franchise of this type at this stage of its run. The Poppy Prescott character is an outstanding addition to the franchise's world, fresh, specific, well-performed, thematically resonant. The Maxime Le Mal villain works as both comedic antagonist and thematic foil. And the film has something to say, about parenthood, about identity, about how we hold on to who we are when circumstances strip away everything external. These are real strengths. They're not nothing. Where the film falls short. But let's be honest about the weaknesses too, because this film has them, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve anyone. The most legitimate criticism of Despicable Me 4 is that it's overplotted. There are too many narrative strands, the witness protection situation, the Maxime threat, the Gru Poppy mentorship, the Mega Minion subplot, the Gru Jr arc, the individual girls' stories, and none of them get quite enough time to reach their full potential. The film is 94 minutes long. That's actually quite short for the story it's trying to tell. Several of these threads feel abbreviated or rushed in ways that prevent them from landing with full emotional weight. Margo, Edith, and Agnes, characters who drove much of the emotional force of the first three films, are genuinely underserved here. They have moments. They have arcs. But those arcs don't develop with the depth they deserve, and for longtime fans of the franchise, their reduced role is a real loss. The Mega Minion subplot, while entertaining in isolation, doesn't connect to the rest of the film as organically as it should. It feels like it was developed somewhat independently and then inserted into the larger story rather than being generated by the same narrative logic. This isn't fatal. The subplot is funny and visually impressive enough to justify its presence, but it's the most apparent example of the film's structural looseness. Sofía Vergara's Valentina is wasted. As a character, she's never given enough to do. As a performer, Vergara has a comic sensibility that the film doesn't fully exploit. She's essentially a straight man, or straight woman, to Ferrell's maximal chaos, which is a choice, but not the most interesting one available. Comparison to the franchise and its peers. How does Despicable Me 4 rank in the franchise? My personal ranking would put the original Despicable Me firmly at the top. It's a genuinely special film that works both as comedy and as surprisingly effective emotional storytelling, and it has a purity of concept that the sequels necessarily lack. Despicable Me 2 is excellent, perhaps the most polished and satisfying of the sequels, with Lucy and Gru's relationship providing an emotional through-line as strong as the girls in the first film. Despicable Me 3 is, in my view, the franchise's weakest entry, a film that spreads itself too thin across too many competing storylines in a way that prevents any of them from fully working. Despicable Me 4 is better than Despicable Me 3. Probably not better than 2, but closer than most sequels in a long-running franchise manage to be. The specific quality of its emotional material and the freshness of characters like Poppy push it above the franchise's low point and into genuinely respectable territory. In the broader context of animated sequels, Despicable Me 4 compares reasonably favorably with other fourth installment animation. Consider Ice Age, Continental Drift or Shrek Forever After, both fourth films in major animated franchises that arrived at a similar stage of franchise development. Both were commercially successful and critically unimpressive. Despicable Me 4 is doing more sophisticated work than either of those. The film that Despicable Me 4 most wants to be compared to, I think, is Toy Story 4, another fourth installment in a beloved franchise that attempted to add new emotional dimensions to established characters rather than simply replicating what had worked before. Toy Story 4 succeeds more completely. Pixar's craft at this kind of character-driven emotional work is simply on a different level, but the ambition is similar. And ambition in franchise filmmaking is worth acknowledging and rewarding, even when execution falls short of its reach. Section 8, Final Verdict and Closing Thoughts. The overall message. Despicable Me 4 is, underneath all its slapstick and spectacle and Minion absurdism, a film about the unglamorous labor of love. About what happens when the grand gestures are no longer available or appropriate, when the task at hand isn't stealing the moon or defeating a megalomaniacal villain or even winning the hearts of 3 orphaned girls, but simply showing up. Being present. Surviving the nights when nothing you do seems to work. Trusting that the love is there even when the connection isn't yet. For Gru, a character whose arc has always been about learning to want something other than power and recognition, this is the final and most personal frontier. He's learned to love. He's learned to be loved. Now he has to learn to love without any of the performance, without the gate, without the scheme, without the drama. Just him and a baby who won't stop screaming. That's life. That's
Despicable Me
parenthood.
4 is finally
That's,
here,
in the most
and it's his new challenges
and
with his
honest
family,
version
while
of
the Minions bring
what
their
it means
classic
to be
chaos.
a person in relationship with other people who need things from you that can't be solved by stealing the moon. Who is this film for? Despicable Me 4 is, in the most obvious sense, for kids. It moves fast, it's funny, it's colorful, it has minions doing ridiculous things with superpowers, and it has a villain with a cockroach obsession who provides plenty of material for wide-eyed delight or gleefully horrified reaction depending on each child's individual relationship with insects. But, and this is something the best animated films always manage, it's also genuinely for adults who are in the thick of parenthood. For anyone who has experienced that specific, humbling, transformative thing of having someone in your life who needs you in ways that don't fit neatly into your existing sense of who you are. For anyone who has had to surrender ego in service of presence. The film speaks most directly to people who came to the franchise as young adults watching the first film, who have now, 12 or 13 years later, potentially had children of their own. The emotional landscape of Despicable Me 4 will resonate with that generation in ways that a younger audience can enjoy without necessarily accessing strengths. One final time. Let me leave you with the things this film does best, because I want to make sure they're the last thing in your mind. The voice performances, led by a Steve Carell who has never been better in this role. The genuine emotional intelligence of the Gru Jr. storyline. The fresh creative energy of Joey King's Poppy Prescott. Will Ferrell's unhinged commitment to a villain who is both hilarious and strangely poignant. The visual quality of the animation, which represents the best of what Illumination can do. The thematic coherence, the way the film's various threads all connect to the same central question about identity and parenthood and the surrender of ego. And the fundamental decency of the franchise's worldview, its insistence that love, however messily expressed and however imperfectly received, is worth the effort. Weakness is one final time. The overcrowded narrative that prevents any single thread from achieving its full potential. The underutilization of Margo, Edith, and Agnes. The Mega Minion subplot's incomplete integration into the main story. A running time that is arguably too short for the story being told. The wasted potential of Sofía Vergara's Valentina. Final rating. Despicable Me 4 earns a 7.2 out of 10 from me. That's a film that is genuinely good in ways that are easy to overlook if you're approaching it as a cash grab sequel or franchise obligation. It has real things to say. It says them with craft and care and genuine comedic skill. It introduces at least one character who belongs permanently in the franchise going forward. And it takes its central franchise character somewhere emotionally real that needed to be explored. It doesn't transcend its genre or its franchise context the way the very best animated sequels manage to do. It doesn't consistently execute as well as it consistently intends. But its intentions are admirable, its heart is in exactly the right place, and on the specific question of what it means to be a father, not a hero father, not a dramatic gesture father, but just a present father, again and again, without applause, it has something genuinely important to say. In a franchise that has always been, at its core, about the unexpected forms that love can take, Despicable Me 4 is a worthy addition. It's Gru's quietest chapter, in some ways. And quietly, that might be exactly right. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If this kind of deep dive is what you're here for, make sure you're subscribed. We do this for every film that deserves it, and plenty that might not deserve it but get it anyway because we can't help ourselves. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where does Despicable Me 4 rank for you? Is Poppy a character you want to see again? Did the Mega Minions work for you or feel like too much? Let's talk about it. See you in the next one.